everyone. My name is Jennifer Dutois, and I want to thank you for joining us today and welcome you to our webinar, Optimizing Your Employee Communication Strategy. Whether you're an HR professional, an organizational leader, or someone passionate about optimizing talent strategies, you're in the right place. But before we jump in, there are a few housekeeping items I need to share with you. First, this webcast is in listen-only mode, so if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box on your screen. And if we can't respond to your specific question during the presentation, a Gallagher contact will follow up with you. Second, HRCI and SHRM credits are available. See the webcast console for additional details, and you'll also receive an email after the webinar that contains these details, as well as the recording of today's session and a PDF of the slides. So let's get started. The statistics shown on your screen are from Gallagher's State of the Sector report, which focuses solely on employee communication. We'll give you a little more background on this report in a bit, but for now, I'd like to share that in the report, we found that 78% of responders believe the purpose of internal communication is to support culture and belonging. In addition, we found 74% of respondents recognize the significance and importance of employee experience, with a third of respondents actually working to improve their employee experience. And optimizing your employee communication strategy will actually help you improve both metrics for your organization. What you communicate, when you communicate, and how you communicate all factor into your employee's experience. And your employee's experience is enhanced when your organization's culture is built upon trust, respect, and inclusivity. And while communication alone won't define your organization's culture or your organization's employee experience, clear, honest, and open communication that's part of a holistic communication strategy is a critical component to being successful in either of these areas. Again, what, how, and when you communicate all factor into your employee's experience. From the very first interaction during the recruiting process, your prospective employees are assessing their own fit within your organization. And it's an important assessment on both sides, so you attract talent that fits well within your organization's culture. And it's an assessment your employees will continue to make during their tenure with your organization. Each day, they bring their whole selves to work. They may be feeling great, they're working on a rewarding project, they feel supported by their manager and connected with their peers. But they'll also have rocky times. Maybe they're dealing with a new diagnosis. They're stressed out because they have to find a new childcare provider, or they're feeling financially stressed as they try to pay down their student loans. Wherever they are, there will be moments when they ask themselves, should I stay or should I go? Our global innovation leader for organizational well-being, Kathleen Scholes, calls this the worth it equation. Is this job worth it? And while your employees' answer to their own worth it equation won't rest solely on employee communication, your internal communication with your employees will play a role in how they respond. Is your communication strategy consistent and aligned with your overall benefit and people strategy? Do your communications reflect your organization's culture? Do they help instill trust with your employees? Do they make them feel included and that they belong? If the answer to these are yes, then you're more likely to get a yes from your employees when they answer their own worth it equation. So before we go much further, I would like us to get introduced to our speakers. So Ed and Sharn, would you please introduce yourselves? And since we also bring our whole selves to work into this webinar, let's give the audience a chance to get to know you a bit and add a few details about yourself outside of your day job.
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Berry. I'm the National Managing Director for Gallagher's HR Technology Practice. And when I'm not indoors playing around with technology, I love to be outdoors. I love to ride horses and ride motorcycles, and it is an absolute pleasure to be with you here today.
Thanks, Ed, and I love that. My name is Sharn. I am a strategy partner in Gallagher's communication practice. So not only do I work with clients, but I also uncover and share industry trends and thought leadership in the communication space. And fun fact about me, I love outside of work traveling. So I'm an avid traveler. I think I'm about country 68 or 69 now. And I'm actually from Australia, living in London for 10 years. So you might hear a hint of an accent.
That's pretty impressive, Sharon. As I stated at the start of the call, I'm Jennifer Dutois, and I'm your moderator for today's discussion. I've spent my career working in the health benefits space, and I currently consult with large clients on their health and welfare benefit strategies. And in order for those strategies, those solutions, if you will, to come to life, I partner with a lot of our communication and engagement team members because it's by that partnering that with our communication team that we're going to get optimal results. But that's the work side. I'm also the mom of 2 boys, 3 if you count our new puppy. And I am also a cancer survivor, which I want to speak to you about for just a minute. I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer at the end of February of 2020. And I was actually going into surgery as the World Health Organization was declaring a pandemic. It was a scary time for me, but it was also a time of uncertainty and fear for everyone else around the globe. I was lucky to be diagnosed when I was. I was lucky to start treatment when I did. I was lucky to have an amazing care team and the support of all of my family and friends. And at work, I was lucky to have my manager and my coworkers support as well. You know, when everything was focused on the pandemic and how we're going to work during the pandemic, their support meant a lot to me. And their support stemmed from who we are. It's our culture. It's in our DNA as an organization. And it's a culture that fit for me. From my perspective, it's that culture that helps instill trust and loyalty. And you might be thinking, what does this have to do with communication? But communication, meaning the information that you share with your employees via any and all channels in which you share it, feeds into your employees' experience. You know, during that time, my manager was communicating to us about the pandemic and how we were going to work within the pandemic. And he communicated clearly, honestly, authentically. And then when I needed information around benefits or policy information related to my treatment and my care, I was able to quickly access all of the information I needed because I knew where to go and how to find it. And so I wasn't stressed about those things. I was able to focus on my fight and taking care of myself. And that's probably a little deep for our webinar today, but I just really wanted to share a personal example and to help correlate like how employee communications impact your experience and how it has that personal effect. And it still needs to have a bit of a personal touch, and that these communications make a difference and they have an impact in people's lives. So again, a little deep, but definitely wanted to make that connection. And after that, I would like to review the topics that we're going to cover today on today's webinar. So today, Ed, Sharon, and I are going to focus in 4 key areas. First, we'll look at data. We're going to share some insights from our 2024 State of the Sector report. And a spoiler alert there, the report isn't actually going to be released until tomorrow. So you're getting a sneak peek at some of our findings. Second, we're going to discuss optimizing your employee communication strategy and why it's important and share some real life examples. Third, we'll discuss how leveraging AI, artificial intelligence, can play a role in your communication strategy. And finally, we'll cover a few communication strategies that can actually help enhance your employee experience. So let's get started. All right. As I mentioned before, Gallagher's 2024 State of the Sector report will be released tomorrow, and it is loaded with data. So at this time, I'd like to pass the conversation over to Sharon. Sharon, can you explain what the State of the Sector report is and why it's so important?
Yeah, thanks. Of course, that's what I love to do. So State of the Sector is really the definitive report for internal communication. So each year we survey thousands of communicators globally across a range of different industries, organization sizes, and from various reporting lines. And all of that is done to compile benchmarks and actionable insights that can help you optimize your communication strategy, which is why we're here today.
Awesome. Let's keep this conversation going, Sharon. What are some of the key findings coming out of this year's report?
Yeah, definitely. So if we have a look at this first slide, every year we ask communicators about their top priorities for the year ahead. So this year, we saw that the highest priority for communicators was to engage their teams around purpose, strategy, and values. We found it, what we did find interesting this year, there's a few of the usual suspects on there, but actually enhancing leadership visibility moved up the ranks in the top priority. So it actually leapfrogged over people manager communications for the first time in a few years. And of course, our number 5 priority, whizzing through these, was improving impact measurement and evaluation. And of course, everyone's joining us today because we know that data drives decisions. So it's no surprise to see it prioritized on the list. The other thing that we look at every year is our top barriers. So if we have a look at our top 5 on this next slide, we've got lack of time and capacity in my team as the number 1 barrier. And spoiler alert again, these 5 are exactly the same as the top 5 last year. So we know time and capacity is always an issue, a lack of budget is always an issue. But what we did find interesting was that disengaged employees was the number 2 barrier. And if we look at, we also asked, what is your key success indicator in communications? And the number 1 success indicator for communicators was employee engagement. So, overcoming that engagement challenge is very much the job. And as Jennifer, you were saying before, right, like there's so many things that go into your employee experience. Communication is just one, but it can really make a difference there. The other thing I wanted to highlight on the next slide is our top topics. So say that 10 times fast, but our top communicated topics over the last year. So number 1, strategy, vision, and purpose. And of course, that tracks with the top priority as well. We saw that communicators felt that employees had a 55% sort of understanding. So what that represents is those who felt that their employees had an excellent or a good understanding was 55%. We see organizational change, integration, and M&A activity at number 2. Really low understanding on that one. So it's a bit of a risky area. Number 3, business performance. So that's all the financials, that kind of thing. Values, behavior, and culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And just because I know that there are a lot of folks on this webinar for whom this will be interesting, reward and benefits was the seventh most communicated topic, but less than half of respondents said that employees had a decent understanding. So lots of room to improve there, Jennifer.
Sharon, that is great information. And as you indicated, much of our audience are HR benefits and total rewards professionals. So let's dive into that rewards and benefits topic a little bit more. Less than half, 49% of employees understand their rewards and benefits. So how do we improve that metric? How can we ensure that what we're communicating in this area is resonating with employees and, even at time their dependents at home?
Yeah, and I think if we jump to the next slide, we've got like a great visual of this as well. So I think when we talk about rewards and benefits, it's definitely personal to employees, sort of like the example you gave, and thank you for sharing. It can be really hard, and your company nailed it, to get the right information to the right people at the right time. But I like to think about the communication on reward and benefits through sort of 3 lenses. So do employees know that they exist? That's kind of step 1. Number 2, do they know if the reward and benefits are the right ones for their sort of situation? And finally, do they know actually how to access them and how to use them? And the channels and techniques that we use to communicate across those 3 areas can change, right? So the messages might get more specific and nuanced as we get sort of further down that journey. But what appeals and applies to each employee changes over time. And as we move through life stages or even career stages, as you see here, from entry level to mid-career to established to pre-retiree, different things will appeal to different people. And sometimes it can be useful to look, to think about employee cohorts through those kind of demographic proxies as well, like generation. So it's not a perfect science, but how you reach and talk to a younger set of employees or entry-level employees might be different to how you talk to older or more senior folks in their career. So tailoring your approach to meet their preferences will work wonders. And another nugget of information there, we found that communicators who asked their employees about their communication preferences actually had higher channel satisfaction. So it does definitely improve things to ask people what they think, right?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it seems like there's really no one-size-fits-all approach to communicating. So analyzing and understanding your workforce data really will enhance your communication strategy, but perhaps asking employees about their communication preferences really can optimize it. because the goal is to communicate clearly, authentically, and across this multi-generational workforce. So it's important to meet employees where they are based on their own individual communication and learning preferences. And with that, let's go to our first poll question. Our first poll question is, what communication channels do you prefer for effective employee engagement? And take your time to answer. And if you want to see the results of this or any of the polls during this webinar, please reach out to your Gallagher contact, who will share all the poll results with you after today's event. All right, so moving on. We've covered a few key insights from this year's State of the Sector report, and we discussed leveraging your own workforce data to enhance your communication strategies. But let's take it one step further. Sharon, there is so much information an organization needs to share with employees, and only a portion of that information may be applicable to any particular employee at any given point. So how are organizations making sure they're getting the right message to the right person at the right time? And how do organizations ensure that their messages are going to resonate and engage employees?
Yeah, definitely. And always a challenge, which is why people love State of the Sector, because every year, if you take a look at this next slide, we start to look at the different channels that people use. But I know a lot of organizations are guilty of what we call the fire hose approach, right? So tell all people all things at all time and try and hold back that relentless sort of communications flow. But actually, we need to use data, and we can look at some of these benchmarks here to start to refine the channels that we use to communicate with employees. So as I said, every year we ask what channels people are using, but we also ask them how effective they feel they are. And so, of course, there are some, differences. Not all channels are created equal. So if we have a look at the slide here, you can see that there's some frequently used channels. So like email, which is sitting at 92% usage with 89% effectiveness. But there's maybe a few underrepresented or underutilized channels, such as an employee magazine. So only 15% of people are using magazines, but with 87% perceived effectiveness. And there's a couple of other nuggets in there, like letters and text message. So of course, a channel mix that you reach your employees through is going to be different and unique to every organization. It's going to depend a lot on whether you've got distributed working, all in the office, if you've got deskless workers, so people who are maybe in a healthcare setting or manufacturing setting that don't have access to email. But all that is to say, it's worth doing a little bit of trial and error, looking at the data, measuring how the different channels work for you, and just really get to grips with what works best for you. And of course, asking employees their preferences doesn't hurt either. But beyond individual channels, I did also want to share some interesting finds around the trends that we saw in channels this year. So, as I said, there's no one size fits all, but there's some things that are coming through as themes. So what we found was that about half of people didn't change their channel mix in the last year, and that we had more people adding a channel than replacing or removing one. So sometimes it feels like the solution might be to add another channel to reach your employees, but maybe that won't always add up to channel satisfaction. We'll talk about that in a moment. But when it came to the individual channels, what we did find was that real-time channels, so live channels like face-to-face calls or webinars, were really effective when it came to broadcasting information. When it came to collaborating around information, collaboration channels, the informal ones work best. So we're talking about like brown bag lunch sessions or lunch and learns if you're in the UK, or even text messages and one-to-one. So the more casual ones were more effective. And I found this nugget fascinating. We saw that portal usage reduced by 46%, but app usage increased by 48%. So I'm going to hazard a guess that a lot of employee portals are now available on mobile, which is why we've seen that swing. But a few other tidbits, we saw that video usage went up a touch, letters and posted materials went down a touch. We saw a bit more usage of intranets. And I think we've seen some, a little bit of movement, but pretty solid across the board. Particularly email is always going to be the one to dominate the day, right? So when it comes to satisfaction around channels and how people feel about their channel mix, as I said before, there were more people adding a channel than removing one. And actually 1 in 3 added a channel in the past year, but also 1 in 3, maybe not the same one, but but 1 in 3 are dissatisfied with their channel mix. Now, what makes people satisfied? We also wanted to know, if you're dissatisfied, what's driving that? And actually, the ability to meet employee needs was the #1 driver of channel satisfaction. So really putting employees at the center of your strategy. But when we looked at why did people add a channel, even though we know that the volume of communication is a challenge this year, 1 in 3 were adding a channel because the business needed them to, whereas 1 in 4, fewer of them, were adding a channel due to employee feedback, right? So what that says to us is that we're adding a channel, but it's because the business told the communicator to, or just by chance, rather than because employees asked for it. So we also found, as I said before, that those who ask their employees their preferences actually report higher channel satisfaction, but also effectiveness. And yet a huge portion, 23%, just never ask their employees what their communication preferences are. So, a huge missed opportunity. And speaking of asking employees their preferences, we wanted to get to grips with the kind of listening channels that are out there. So how are we not only, pushing communications out, but how are we feeding back to the organization? And we saw the top 5 stay about similar this year. So #1 was engagement survey. And as I said before, that key success metric for communicators was employee engagement. So it tracks about the same amount of people are running an engagement survey with pretty high effectiveness at 79%. A couple of jumps we saw, I think, Jennifer, you were nailing it before with the kind of authentic, honest commitment from leaders and from organizations. I suspect that's why live Q&A is jumping up the mix. We also saw leadership visibility becoming a higher priority. So I think that's reflected here. There's nothing more authentic than putting a leader on the spot with a hard question in a live Q&A. But we also saw this post-event feedback jumping up too, which suggests that there's a formalization of these sessions that we're running. If we're having a webinar or having a town hall, not unlike this webinar right now, we'd be making sure we ask for feedback afterwards, because it is a legitimate channel rather than just like a casual get-together. The ones to watch, however, the most effective were listening sessions. So, that's where you can pick up the nuance and really get to grips with what employees are thinking. The least effective was employee assistance program feedback. And the one to watch for this year, we saw that only 8% of people were using an external agency to run an audit on their communications, but they found it to be 81% effective, right? So that's another hot tip from us, is to run an audit to see where you're at with your communications. So all of that listening and all of that data, because we love data and that's why we're here, how do we use it to optimize our strategy? We wanted to understand, what are communicators actually measuring? So we looked at the usual suspects, reach. So this is how many emails have you sent out, how many have been opened, how many people have seen a post on the intranet, and 77% are measuring reach. And that's an increase on last year. And in fact, we've seen increases across the board on all measurements. So understanding behavior change and satisfaction with communication. But there's still a ways to go, because there's only 60% measuring that employee satisfaction. And another interesting nugget, 20% said that their reach measurement is always on. So that's suggesting to me, with the reach metrics there, that there's more people who are starting to use tools and platforms that have a portal where they can check on how their comms are doing at any given moment. So that was also really interesting to see. So moving on to, we've collected the data, we've collected the listening evidence. What are we doing with all of that data? How are we using it to optimize our strategy? So first, biggest reason for collecting and using data is to evidence return on investment, to really prove the value of communications within the organization. And as you can see, that's increased 18% since last year. So communicators are getting really savvy to using data. And you can see as well that we've had a 23% increase in communicators using that data to request investment and build that business case. It's getting very strategic there. So despite all of that measurement and all the good stuff that people are doing with it, 84% said that they want to measure more, so more often or more comprehensively, right? So there's definitely a hunger from communicators, and I suspect from leaders too, to see this evidence of communication making a difference within the organization. And so seeing that evidence, what do we do to improve it, right? So we've got all our channels, we've got our mix. What can we do to actually move the needle on how satisfied we are and how effective we are in communicating? And what we saw was that there's a few key strategic documents that if you have those in your organization, in your possession, you will see an uptick in satisfaction of 10% or more. So having a channel framework, and that's where you work out, what is each channel for? What do I use email to do? What do I use the intranet to do? And who can I reach on each of those channels? Pulling that all together into a central document will help you massively, both with effectiveness and with satisfaction. Having your employee value proposition articulated, having an overarching communications plan, so not just for a short term, but maybe for the entire year, but also having a strategy. Surprise, having a strategy will actually help you increase your satisfaction and effectiveness. Now, what else makes a difference? So when communicators have a more strategic role in the business, effectiveness increases. When you utilize audience profiles or personas, you see an increase in effectiveness. Having fewer deskless workers also will see higher effectiveness. So the opposite is true too. The bigger your deskless workforce, the harder it is to be effective and to reach everybody. So I know that's a common challenge for many at the moment. And finally, as I said, those with the channel framework, we saw there an increase in satisfaction, but also in effectiveness. And I think it was about 3 times more satisfaction compared to having no documents at all. So that's another hot tip from me, is to start to think about what you use each of your channels for, who you're reaching with each of those, and maybe doing a bit of experimenting and collecting data on what works in your mix when you put it all together. So there's a lot there, Jennifer. I've done all the data that I can. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
That was great. And I think we have a couple of real life examples that kind of prove out the point, Sharn. So the first we wanted to go through Ohio Health. So as you were talking about channel mix, employees needed a single source of truth and a single spot to get benefits information. So they had PDFs, they had guides, they had all of these things all over the place. So the solution was to create a channel that could contain all of that information. And what we learned through the outcome is that the solution was needed. In the first month, about 2/3 of employees, or just under 2/3 of employees, actually accessed the site. And so this came from Ohio Health wanting to look at their channel mix and look at how they could get the right information to the right employee at the right time. But the other thing that this site does, which is great, is, at times your spouse, your partner, someone at home needs this information too. So this is actually a publicly available site. And so people from the household, if they need to get benefits information, they're able to access it too. So great. And kudos to Ohio Health for letting us do this great work with them. And if we move on to the next slide, this is an example of a larger client, but there are some, we can translate this to smaller clients too a bit. But this was a client that wanted to look at persona data, but they wanted to use some different data in their personas. They wanted to actually dig into their claims data to understand the population characteristics of those with certain chronic conditions, so they could message to those particular populations more effectively. And we looked at the population with diabetes, and we looked at the population with anxiety and depression. And these are two different cohorts. So the diabetic population tends to skew towards the older generations. The population with anxiety and depression tends to skew younger. The population with diabetes was more heavily weighted on the employee side, whereas the population with anxiety and depression was more heavily weighted to the dependent at home side. So when we're working with this particular client's partners, we would have the EAP and or the medical plan delivering anxiety and depression and mental health care message differently than we would have the diabetic partner message. And that's one channel of messaging. This employer also did holistic messaging too. So, branded in their brand, it looked and felt like the employer, it resonated their culture. So again, just another way of looking at personas and leveraging any and all data that you have to be the most effective. So as we move forward, Ed, I'd actually like to bring you into the conversation at this time. Yeah, we've been talking about leveraging data. We've been talking about the effective strategies, and Sharon shared a ton of data about how to be effective. But what about artificial intelligence or AI? Like, how can we use AI, and how do we leverage this to enhance our employee communications?
Thanks, Jennifer. So I think I really need to start with saying AI is just evolving at such a rapid pace that people are a little tepid. They're not sure what they want to do, how deeply to weigh in. And you really probably should leave today saying to myself, I want to try it. It has promise. I just need to monitor it. So I'm here to tell you that AI is here to stay. It's only going to grow, but don't fear it. Just manage it. I think that's really important. The other thing that happens in AI is people get confused. They don't understand the difference between hyperautomation, AI, generative AI. So let's kind of start with like, what is it? So things like, even things as basic as Grammarly or Alexa, the Google Assistant, Siri, if you give it a clear question, it'll give you a clear answer, or you'll get that dreaded response, I'm sorry, I have no information. Would you like to ask the question again? And that's because it's trying to respond on a one-to-one correspondence on what you're asking. But when people think about hyperautomation and they start to think, oh, maybe that's AI, it's really not. So here's a really great example that I think we could all absolutely, relate to. If I want to request paid time off, all I have to do is go into my system, and I'm just going to assume your system has this capability. You go and request, let's say, 5 days off, and it's 3 months from now. The machine is just doing basic math. It's going to check, oh, you have 3 vacation days earned now. Oh, but in 3 months, yeah, you'll have that time available, no problem. It will tell your manager, you don't have it now, you will have it, you can approve this, and it will be okay. The manager clicks approve, you get an email back, and it says your request has been approved. And then not only that, it will populate your timesheet with PTO so you don't have to. That's not artificial intelligence. That is literally hyper automation. It's taking a process and making it super fast by letting the machine do the work. So what then is AI? So let's kind of start with who are the major players. So there's Google Bard, Gemini, there's ChatGPT, Llama 2, Claude 2. There's a lot more than that, but these are the main commercially available companies, each containing millions to trillions of data points of human knowledge, right? That's the important thing here. So AI, they're actually called large language models. They're just fed with an immense number of data points, and it allows the user to query something, and it lets the algorithm determine the output. Simultaneously, at least in generative AI, the machine is learning based on the query that you gave it, and it's making decisions on its own. And that's all based on the algorithm. So you'll see that it is human-like. It's not obviously a human doing it, but because it's based on human data, it's behaving in a human-like manner. So as we progress through today, I think you're going to better understand why Merriam-Webster's dictionary literally says it imitates human behavior. So what's the difference between artificial intelligence versus generative artificial intelligence? AI is designed to perform a very specific task better and at a lower cost than a human, while generative AI creates new and original content out of that large language model that resembles but can't be found exactly in that data because it's training itself. So what it's doing is it's linking logical thought into an output based on its algorithm and also based on what you asked it. So generative AI in its basic sense is stitching together an answer based on your query. And that answer may be perfect and it may not. And as we'll see later, generative AI just isn't capable of telling the difference between truth and a lie, at least not yet, because it's changing very fast. So that brings us to our first poll question. How many of you are using AI in some form in HR? Because I think that's pretty critical that we know. So now let's kind of talk about what we've found in our survey. So about 6% on average are using some form of AI. About 25% are considering using AI, and you can see the trepidation in the marketplace. 50% of the people, they're just not considering AI. They're not ready for it yet. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. As we kind of move further and think about what is the need then for the human touch, on our next slide, we'll kind of see if we think about a real life story. Avianca Airlines had a lawsuit where their lawyer, a 30-year experienced lawyer, used ChatGPT to write his legal briefs. Nothing like using automation to get something done. Totally support that. I think it's awesome. But you kind of have to really be careful, because these large language models, they're taught what a citation is because it was a definition put in by a human. And the more legal citations you have on court cases to bolster your position, in theory, should give you an edge when trying to win a court case. Well, attorney Stephen Schwartz, a colleague of his and their firm, were caught a bit unaware that ChatGPT is trying to solve their problem, but it can't tell truth from a lie, right? So what happened is it stitched together his request perfectly based on what he asked, and it fed him not one, but six non-existent court decisions that he used as citations to bolster his personal injury case. Well, the judge was not happy. And then he found himself in the awkward position of literally asking the judge to not sanction him, not sanction his license, his career. But in the end, he, a colleague in his firm, were sanctioned, and they were fined $5,000. So you have to understand that generative AI, because it's stitching things together based on what you ask, still needs a human to figure out whether it's actually right. And Fortune did a really great study. In August of 2023, they published an article that shows that AI can identify your keystrokes using just the sound of your typing and steal what you're typing with a 95% accuracy rating. That is astounding. But really, defining when AI can perform a task or when the human touch is needed, let's be sure we leave the human in human resources. So in benefits, wouldn't you rather speak to a human that has empathy for your situation if you're filing a death claim for a spouse or a child instead of AI? I know I would. Similarly, at annual review time, there's probably a few people, maybe they're not going to get such a great grade, but not a lot that I'd suspect, who would want feedback from a computer. I want my annual review to be given to me by my boss, preferably in person, could be online. But I really want to hear it from a human. I don't want to hear about my performance from a PC, even if AI is used to gather data about my performance and how I'm doing. So it's very, very important that we keep the human touch involved to check what the computer is doing. So that kind of brings us to our next poll question. For those of you who are using AI in HR, which areas are you using it in? And while you're completing the poll, I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit and talk about 4 really important outputs from our study that we did in December of 2023. So recruiting, 45% not considering, 25% considering, 13% using. It kind of makes sense because recruiting is a labor-intensive, very lots of resumes, but that's still a pretty high number not considering. I think that's also due to the fact that there's a lot of now city and state level rules and laws around what you can and cannot use artificial intelligence for in recruiting. And I don't think that's going to slow down. I think the regulatory pace will pick up. Performance, just what I talked about, 61% are not considering it. They still want a human to talk to their people. 17% considering it, 4% using it. Talent development training, this one makes a lot of sense. 48% are not considering it. So more are really kind of on that we want to use it mode. 24% are actively considering, and 14%, which is higher than I expected. Sorry, 4% is actually a little higher than I expected. Is using it. It's fine. I think the creation of emails, 45% not considering it. So that's a little surprising, but it's actually changed, in my opinion, from my research. 24% are considering it and 14% already have it in place. That is a large number for already in place when you look at this chart overall. And what it's doing is allows you to create emails with empathy, create emails with more professional language, create emails in multiple languages, actually, if you want. So the starting with emails makes a lot of sense to me. And we'll see this continue to evolve over time.
And this landscape seems really diverse, and there's a ton of tools available, it looks like. Can you share some insights on which tools are really tailored for HR purposes?
Yeah, so this is where the fun comes in, right? So you can have chatbots, avatars for benefits administration, for ready answers on healthcare navigation, deductibles. Are my providers in network, out of network? What's my plan design? And the reason it's so useful is because this can give you a factual answer. It's not going to have to stitch anything together. And the risk of getting an answer that's based on some non-existent data is extraordinarily small. This is a really great place for people to start. I also think people haven't realized that we've been in the AI world for a while. A machine is looking at your retina. It's looking at your fingerprint when you clock in or clock out. It's looking at your palm print when you're at a data center, and it's deciding whether or not the pattern of your skin, your iris, or your finger allows you entrance. So it's making a decision based on how it's reading your body. I'm not entirely sure everyone realized or cared because it just was a function. Whereas generative AI is what's kind of causing people, the palpitations that they're having. Job descriptions and emails, nicer, more empathetic, more professional, free of, I play with this all the time. It allows you to write free of racial bias, sexual bias. It's just absolutely a great tool for this type of thing. And then there's employee sentiment analysis. This one makes people a little uncomfortable because it analyzes the contents of email about your attitude, or if you're a poor communicator, or if your communication style has changed. Maybe you're becoming less attached to your job. It can tell, and it will produce a report that you should be having kind of a conversation. Your supervisor will contact you and say, hey, we've noticed that there's been a change in the way you communicate. And I think that sentiment analysis is really, really, really important. There's a couple of other things to kind of think about here. Believe it or not, AI already has apps. So that's something that was unexpected. If you want to convert an AI, let's say an email, you want multiple languages, you can ask AI directly, or you can use an app called Speak. And it will take, it's an add-on to your AI, and it will just convert your memo. Maybe you have 5 languages, and it will just continue to actually massage it in the right language. It's not like Google Translate where you get kind of sometimes some hilarious translations. This will do it like the correct way. And not that I don't love Google Translate because I use it all the time. Wolfram, if you want to do math, Wolfram is an app that you should add, and it allows AI to do a lot more complex things. And then the best thing about AI and generative AI is the more you query. So don't worry about writing like one sentence. It's kind of like when we learned Boolean logic when we were younger. You can write really pretty big in sets of instructions. And there's an app called Prompt Perfect. It will help you write a really good query to get a really good result. Because if you just write something random, you're probably going to get something random back. So, to wrap up kind of the way AI is and what you should be thinking, don't fear it. It's here to stay. Embrace it, but monitor it.
Thank you, Ed. As we move into our next section, I just wanted to say it was great hearing about AI and how there really are some practical applications that we can leverage appropriately for HR communications. But now we're going to move into our final section. What strategies can you implement to ensure talent optimization? So as we go into the next slide, Sharon, I think these stats are so interesting and telling. 74% of respondents have an internal communication plan just for a specific tactic or campaign or initiative, but only 42% have a more holistic plan that covers multiple campaigns over the course of the year. So for those of us working with communicators, whether it's an internal team or an external partner, what is the best approach to making sure that we're able to work in a more strategic way with our communicators and align our communications with our organization's talent objectives?
Yeah, I think, as you say, this is very telling. And back to kind of some of the data that we were looking at before, what we did find as well was that the communicators that had that longer term plan actually had increased effectiveness across their channels when it came to reaching employees. But not only that, we found that taking a strategic approach to communication, so that's where communicators are proactive in designing the strategy for a topic rather than reactive, it actually increases employee understanding of those topics. So probably pretty obvious, right? If communicators are strategic, employees get it better. But so much about being strategic is about having that foresight to know what's coming. So having that plan. So as you can see, it's easy to look ahead for a campaign or initiative, but it's a lot harder to look ahead for the entire year, say. So I think my hot tip, and there's been a lot of those today, anyone working with communicators, involve them early in decision-making, particularly around change. They are the eyes and ears of the organization. So they might also have some interesting inputs and insights to share about employee preferences, particularly if they've taken our advice and they've asked employees what those preferences are.
That is really interesting, Sharon. And in addition to working more strategically versus tactically with our communication partners, I know my manager helped me have a positive experience. How can we pull managers in? I heard in another poll that managers can have just the same impact on an employee's mental health as their spouse can, which is interesting. And our own data reveals that there's a positive correlation between manager effectiveness and employee understanding. So how do we harness the power of managers? Does it make sense for organizations to focus on manager training and support them to be better communicators?
Yeah, Jennifer, that was a question we were asking ourselves as well, because I know every year we have a lot of communicators complaining or rating managers poorly on their communication skills, but we've all been there, right? We've all had an amazing manager, like the one you were talking about, Jennifer, with your experience in your story, who is like shuttling you in the right direction and is great at communicating and keeps things authentic and open and clear. But actually, a lot of people managers aren't doing so well when it comes to communications. And our survey found that 3 in 5 respondents said that manager communication was below their expectations, right? But despite that, 84% of people rely on managers for communication to some degree. And again, no surprises there, but we've now got the data to prove it. If managers are better communicators, employee understanding increases. Who'd have thunk it? But what we did find too is that the topics that were managers were relied upon most were around purpose, values, behavior, strategy, vision, all of these really critical topics when it comes to strategic alignment and culture and belonging. And on those topics, we found that employee understanding increases when performance of managers increases. And we also found that was as your deskless population grows, so the proportion of deskless employees grows, managers are relied upon even more. So no surprise there. If you are out in a factory, in the field, in as I said before, like a healthcare profession, managers are so key critical to getting messages out to people who don't sit at a computer all day. So we also, we found that, of course, communicators are relying on people managers, but does the business actually rely on people managers? Do they value communications as a skill? So we wanted to find out, do businesses evaluate managers on their communication skills? And we found that actually only 1 in 4, 24%, said that managers were evaluated on communication skills in their organization. And what was really surprising is that when managers are evaluated on their communication skills, they are twice as likely to meet and exceed expectations, right? So if you evaluate them and hold them accountable, their performance will increase. So I guess one of my hot takeaway for that is that if you are in HR and there is an opportunity to optimize your communication strategy via evaluating people managers on their communication skills, that can be a really great way in. So holding them to account. But as we know, that is not always an easy thing to do. You can't just, overnight snap your fingers and have a whole new performance management system. So we also wanted to know what tools and resources were being provided to managers. So you can see on this next slide, and this was surprising to me, a lot of tools and resources being provided to managers. So on-demand learning was the highest provided, written or downloadable resources. So that might be talking points or Q&As for managers to pass on to the employees. Managers only forums and communication channels, training, and one-to-one coaching or mentoring. But I found this interesting. You were more likely as a people manager to receive tools and resources if you weren't evaluated on your communication. So it's a little bit difficult out there for managers, right? We're giving them a hard time. They are key critical, but it's often the ones that aren't held accountable for comm skills that are the ones that are getting the resources. So when we crunched the numbers, what we did find as well was that the biggest uptick in performance was found to be when internal communications departments specifically provided on-demand learning for people managers. So, I mean, not to put more on the communicator's plate, but that was the kind of biggest increase in performance was seen through that method and provided by that team. So there's a myriad of ways to support managers, I guess, is the takeaway from that. If you can't keep them accountable through performance management measures, can you provide them with resources? And your employees will see the benefits because, of course, they'll understand better when managers are better communicators.
Awesome. Thanks, Sharon. And we tried to boil down all of your hot topics and hot tips from the session. And we have some key takeaways here for the audience. And this has been a great discussion and conversation. So thank you both for that. But first and foremost, you want to get clear on your communication functions, purpose, and success metrics. So whether you're working with an internal communication team or external communicators, implement a measurement dashboard and stay on track by demonstrating ROI with your leadership. To articulate your employee value proposition or your EVP and be consistent about communicating it. Number 3 is to develop a holistic and overarching communication strategy. And remember to bring your communication partners in early. Work with your communicators on developing that holistic plan for the entire year. Refine your channel framework. So look at your channels, understand your employee communication preferences, and consider asking your employees about their preferences. You can also run a communications audit, which Sharn said would be highly valuable. You can include focus groups, learning sessions, and in addition, analyze your data. Work with your data to develop those personas that you can use to help support your strategies. And then be part of the change committee. HR and executive teams should be collaborating with their communicator partners and their communication teams to get ahead of the curve. And support your managers. Your employees depend upon them. So provide your managers with on-demand communication resources, and where possible, evaluate your managers on their communication skills. And finally, find out where your company stands on AI. Start experimenting with it, obviously with safety and with purpose. And then really, this is number 8, but it probably should be first and foremost. Look after your own well-being. Please take care of yourselves, because if you aren't taking care of yourselves, you can't take care of others. And really, at the end of the day, that is what we are trying to do, is with our employee experience, be that caring partner for our employees. So just to sum it up, Ed and Sharn, I love strategizing and I love working with my clients to create solutions, but we can define the perfect solution. Whether it's condition management program, training, enhancing compensation, it could be really great news. But if it isn't communicated clearly, effectively, at the right time, in the right way, it's not going to be set up for optimal success. So the key highlight I'm walking away is bring your communication partners in early. Allow them to be a strategic partner, because this is how you will optimize your communication strategy. And then finally, just as a reminder, you will receive an email with additional information on your HRCI and SHRM credits, as well as the slides and a recording of this webinar. If you have any questions or you want to discuss any of this further, just let us know. You can either drop a note in the Q&A box on your screen, or you can reach out to your Gallagher contact. And just as a reminder, Gallagher can support clients of any size in any industry, so let us know how we can help. We're here to help you. All right, so what is next for us? This year's State of the Sector report, which we've mentioned again and again and again, and given you a sneak peek of the data, is our annual global survey about employee communication and experience trends. It's coming out tomorrow, and you're going to be getting a copy of this in your post-event email. So stay tuned, check your inbox, and look for that report. In addition to the State of the Sector report, I want to make sure you mark your calendars for March 6th. This is going to be the first in our 2024 Own Your Growth Women's Leadership Series. The first webinar in this series is going to be focused on navigating your career trajectory. And during this webinar, our global panel of female leaders will share their personal experiences and lessons from their careers. And we hope this helps you navigate your own professional journey and, above all, own your growth. So I want to thank our presenters. Thank you for the insightful conversation. And well, before I do that, you will have a resource pod available to you on your screen. There is a wealth of information. So you're getting a lot from us today. You're going to get case studies and articles. All of this stuff has been curated today to complement our discussion. And then just as a reminder, this is part of our HR strategy session series. And this is our commitment to bring insights and trends throughout the year to you, because our mission really is to empower you all with the right knowledge and data to build your own total rewards with confidence. And finally, a big thank you to our panelists, Ed and Sharn. It was a pleasure speaking with you both today. I've learned a lot. And to our attendees, we hope you found this information valuable. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thanks, everyone.